In the late 1800s, French cooks invented a ceramic crock that could keep butter fresh for an entire month without a single block of ice or watt of power. It used nothing but a cup of water and a design so simple you can still buy the exact same device today. For 80 years, this method sat on kitchen counters across Europe, while the rest of the world forgot it existed. Because what those cooks understood about oxygen, temperature, and a seal that costs nothing to maintain changes everything you know about keeping food cold. That butter crock is only one of 3 ways farmers kept dairy fresh before refrigerators. All 3 methods still work today. I tested them, and the reason we don't use them has nothing to do with how well they worked. The second technique keeps cheese fresh for months, with no power at all. The first is the French butter crock. You pack butter into a bell-shaped cup, invert it into a base of cool water, and that water seals out oxygen. Unglazed earthenware evaporates moisture from the outside, pulling away heat. Change the water every couple of days. Keep it below 80 degrees, and your butter stays fresh for a month without any refrigeration. The second method runs colder. Appalachian families built spring houses directly over cold water seeps, stone walls, a shallow trough, and flowing water at 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Crocks of milk, butter, and cheese sat in that constant chill. The water never froze, never warmed. A spring house could preserve dairy all summer. The third technique, the one that works for months, is a brine wrap for cheese. A cloth soaked in salt water, tightened around a wheel of hard cheese. The salt creates an osmotic barrier that stops spoilage bacteria cold. In cellars across Europe, wheels brined this way lasted all winter without a single ice block. Now, before the 1930s, these were not survival hacks. They were how everyone kept dairy. Butter crocks on kitchen counters, spring houses out back, brined cheese in the cellar. The methods were proven, safe, and almost zero cost. Then the power lines came. The Rural Electrification Administration wired rural America, starting in 1935. Refrigerator companies followed, telling families that without an electric cold box, their milk would turn to poison. The old ways were framed as unsanitary, backward, even dangerous. And the speed at which that narrative erased a century of practical knowledge is the most important number in this story. Because millions of households abandoned their crocks and spring houses within a single generation. Most of the knowledge died with the people who lived before the grid, but not all of it. I found a man in Pennsylvania who still brines cheese the pre-industrial way. He showed me a trick that more than doubles what the historical record says is possible. And when I tested it myself, I understood exactly why the appliance industry never wanted you to know this one detail. His name was Eli Stoltzfus. He lived in a stone house in Lancaster County that his great-grandfather built in 1872. The house had never had a refrigerator. When I arrived, he was in the cellar, pulling a wheel of hard cheese off a wooden shelf. It had been aging for 8 months. No mold, no rot, no foul smell. It smelled like toasted nuts and cream. Eli wiped the wheel with a damp cloth and held it up to the lantern light. The rind was clean. Then he showed me something I had never seen in any book or video. Before he wraps the cheese in brine-soaked linen, he smears it with a paste made from sifted hardwood ash and fine sea salt. The ash raises the pH at the surface, creating a mildly alkaline barrier where mold spores cannot germinate. The salt pulls moisture outward, just enough to form a protective rind without drying out the interior. Then the brine wrap seals the whole thing. That one extra step, ash before brine, doubles the shelf life. 8 months, maybe a year, without a refrigerator in a cold cellar that stays 50 degrees. I asked him where he learned it. He said his grandmother taught him. She learned it from her mother. The recipe was never written down. And that is when I understood something that had been bothering me for years. The knowledge of how to keep food without electricity didn't fade because it stopped working. It was actively erased. In 1935, the Rural Electrification Administration began wiring rural America. By 1939, the percentage of farms with electricity had jumped from 11% to 25%. The refrigerator industry poured money into advertisements that showed old-fashioned storage methods as filthy. One General Electric ad from 1938 said, quote, "A cellar may keep food cool, but only an electric refrigerator keeps it safe." Another campaign showed a spring house with a dead rat floating in the water. The message was clear. If you wanted to keep your children alive, you needed to buy a fridge. By 1950, the butter crock was a museum piece. The spring house was a relic you pointed to when you drove past an abandoned farm. The brined cheese was replaced by pasteurized blocks wrapped in plastic. And the families who still used the old ways were called stubborn, backwards, or worse. The truth is, those methods worked better than the appliance companies wanted you to believe. They still work now, and the butter crock has one secret that even the French forgot. The original design from the 1870s used a clay mixed with powdered charcoal. That charcoal absorbed impurities and kept the water sweet for an extra week between changes. Today's butter bells sold online are made of plain ceramic. They work for about a week. The real thing, built the old way, can push a month, but nobody sells it anymore. Now, all three methods, the crock, the spring house, the brine wrap, share a weakness. They all depend on one variable that refrigeration eliminated completely. And when I finally got Eli to admit what that variable was, he said something that stopped me cold. It was the same thing that made his grandmother lose an entire winter's worth of butter in 1947. That story is what you need to hear before you trust any of these methods yourself. In February of 1947, Eli's grandmother, Martha, lost every crock of butter she had stored for the winter. The spring house that had served her family for 70 years went dry. A deep freeze cracked the stone floor, and the water stopped flowing for 3 weeks. The butter sat in stagnant air. By the time she could move the crocks to the cellar, the damage was done. The butter had turned. She threw out 43 pounds of dairy that year, and her children drank oatmeal with nothing for 3 months. Eli told me this story while he was slicing a piece of that 8-month-old cheese. He put the knife down and looked at me. "The old ways work," he said, "but they don't forgive. You have to watch them every day." That is the variable the refrigerator industry erased from the conversation, not just the cold. It was the attention. The old methods demanded observation. You had to check the water in the crock, feel the temperature of the spring, smell the cheese, look for the first sign of a sour note. When families had to do that every morning, they could catch spoilage early and adjust. After the refrigerator arrived, that habit disappeared, and when people tried to use the old methods again without that habit, they failed. But here is what the appliance ads never mentioned. Refrigerators fail too. A power outage in August, a compressor that burns out on a Saturday night, a door left open by a child. When a modern fridge fails, the food inside goes bad within hours, and the average family has no backup plan and no skill to save it. The old methods had backups built in. If the spring house failed, you moved the crocks to the cellar. If the cellar got too warm, you rewrapped the cheese with a higher salt concentration. You layered safeguards, and the knowledge of how to do that lived in families like Eli's for 200 years. In Lancaster County, the Amish never stopped using spring houses. They never threw away their stoneware crocks. And during the 1953 drought that hit the eastern United States, when wells went dry and electric pumps failed, the Amish families who still kept their spring houses had water, and they had food. The families who had sold their spring houses for a Frigidaire were the ones who struggled. That doesn't make the old ways perfect. It makes them resilient in a way that a single point of failure never can be. Now, you might be wondering where you can find a spring house in your backyard. You don't need one. The same cooling principle can be recreated with an unplugged chest freezer or a hole in the ground. Eli showed me a modern version. He buried a 5-gallon stoneware crock in the dirt floor of a root cellar. The earth kept it at 52 degrees year-round. He wraps his cheese, sets it in the crock, and covers the top with a damp burlap sack. He changes the sack every day. That is it. No power, no moving parts. A wheel of hard cheese lasts him through winter. But the biggest revelation came when I asked him about spoilage. I expected him to say that if you do everything right, nothing goes bad. He laughed. Everything goes bad eventually, he said. The trick is knowing when it's still good. Then he taught me the 3 signs that tell you a brined cheese has turned, and the one sign that tells you it hasn't even though it looks terrible. That sign is the one that every pre-refrigeration cook knew, and it's the piece of knowledge that nobody in a grocery store will ever teach you, because it would keep you from throwing away perfectly good food. Eli cut a wedge from that wheel and pointed to a patch of white on the rind. Most people see this and throw it out, he said. That's a mistake. Hard cheese, he explained, will grow surface mold. It looks like a science experiment, but the mold only lives where the oxygen touches. Cut an inch back behind the bloom, and the cheese underneath is sterile, safe, and as good as the day it went into the cellar. The soft cheeses, the ones you spread, do not follow this rule. If a soft cheese molds, you throw the whole thing. That one distinction, hard versus soft, was common knowledge in every pre-electric kitchen. Today, it's as forgotten as the butter crock. He gave me the 3 signs that brine-aged cheese has turned for real. First, smell. A healthy aged cheese smells nutty, grassy, or sharp. A spoiled one smells like ammonia or rotting leaves. Not subtle. Second, texture. If the cheese turns slimy instead of damp, and the slime doesn't wipe away, the proteins have broken down past saving. Third, the brine itself. Any pink or orange film on the cloth means bacteria have colonized the salt. Change the wrap immediately. And if the color reached the rind, the wheel is done. For butter, the rules are simpler. Rancid butter smells sour, like blue cheese gone wrong. The surface can still look smooth, so you trust your nose. Mold on butter is not salvageable, the way hard cheese is. Butter's moisture pockets let the roots go deep. If you see spots of gray, green, or black, you throw the whole crock. That's why the water seal matters. Keep the oxygen out. Change the water every 2 or 3 days. And butter in a stoneware crock stays sweet for a solid month. Now, let me give you the honest shelf life of each method. The water-sealed butter crock, kept below 80 degrees with regular water changes. 4 weeks, no power. A brined and ash-rubbed hard cheese wrapped in linen and stored in a root cellar at 50 degrees, 8 to 12 months. A spring house with flowing 55-degree water, all summer for milk, butter, and fresh cheese, provided the water keeps moving. These are not survival fantasies. These are the numbers Eli's family has logged for 5 generations. But the old ways have a hard limit that nobody on a homesteader forum wants to hear. Soft dairy, cream cheese, fresh mozzarella, cottage cheese will spoil in a day or two, even under the best stoneware. For those, you need actual refrigeration or you eat them immediately. The crock and the cellar are not a time machine. They extend the life of foods that were designed by tradition to keep. Cultured butter, hard-aged cheese, brined cheese, and in exchange they give you something a refrigerator cannot: independence. Eli's grandmother threw out 43 pounds of butter in 47, but she did not starve. She had the cheese that had been brined 2 months earlier. She had the summer butter. She had clarified and sealed in rendered fat, which keeps for a year without refrigeration. She had layered her pantry. That layering is the real lesson. Not one method, but 3. Not one point of failure, but a system that degrades gracefully. When the spring ran dry, the cellar took over. When the cellar got warm, the brine concentration went up. When the brine failed, the ash bought another month. That chain of backups is what we traded for a single plug. I have put the exact steps for each method into a guide: the crock, the spring house alternative, the brine wrap, the ash recipe, the temperature targets, and the spoilage checkpoints. The link is in the description, because once you know how your great-grandparents stored dairy, you will never look at a power button the same way again. The Amish never stopped believing that food storage is a skill, not an appliance. They kept that knowledge alive when the rest of the country traded it for a warranty card and a monthly electric bill. And they are not the only ones. In every rural county in America, there are still families who brine their own cheese, who keep a butter crock on the counter, who know that a root-cellar is not a relic, but a backup that never fails. The 3 methods you just saw cost almost nothing to build. They do not care if the grid goes down. They do not require a permit or a technician. What they demand is attention. A few minutes every couple of days to check the water. Feel the temperature, smell the rind. That attention is the part our grandparents never wrote down. Once you build it back into your rhythm, you are no longer helpless when the power fails. If this makes sense to you, I have put together a full step-by-step guide to every method with diagrams, temperatures, and the exact spoilage checkpoints Eli uses. The link is in the first pinned comment below. Hit subscribe, because next I am showing you what the Amish build from the part of the hemp plant that never gets burned, and the industry it threatens is even bigger than fuel. The old ways are still here. You just have to know where to look.